Shalom vänner, profetisk uppdatering 1 november 2024. Och först vill jag ta upp något om Halloween som ju firas den här helgen av många. Och sen kommer jag ta upp lite kortnyheter från Israel. Känner du till Halloweens verkliga historia? Och jag läser här ur Michael Snyders artikel, delar ur det. Det var först under 1900-talet som det faktiskt blev en rikstäckande högtid som firades på en utbredd basis. Och först under de senaste decennierna har den verkligen tagit fart som en global högtid. Halloweens ursprungliga rötter går tillbaka till Samhain, något sånt där uttalas det egentligen från början. En gammal keltisk festival som markerade slutet på skördesäsongen i Irland. Kelterna trodde att den 31 oktober blev gränsen mellan levande och döda, ska vi säga lite tunn. För att hålla alla vandrande andar på avstånd tände de massiva brasor och satte på sig kostymer, förmodligen dubbelt som en solid ursäkt för lite välbehövlig gruppbindning. Förutom det skäl som anges ovan användes halloweenmasker och dräkter för att dölja ens närvaro vid hedniska festivaler eller som i traditionell shamanism förmedlad av en häxdoktor eller hednisk präst och andra former av animism för att förändra bärarens personlighet för att tillåta för kommunikation med andevärlden. Här, jag läste alltså kommunikation med andevärlden. Här kunde kostymer bäras för att avvärja onda andar. Å andra sidan kan kostymbäraren använda en mask för att försöka attrahera och absorbera kraften hos djuret som representerades av masken och dräkten som bärs. Enligt detta scenario kan halloweendräkter ha sitt ursprung hos de keltiska druidernas ceremonideltagare som bar djurhuvuden och skinn för att få styrkan hos ett visst djur. Ja, det här med kraftdjur, det känner vi ju igen från nyandlighet eller New Age. Förutom att orsaka problem och skada grödor trodde kelterna att närvaron av de utomjordiska andarna gjorde det lättare för druiderna eller keltiska präster att göra förutsägelser om framtiden. För ett folk som var helt beroende av den flyktiga naturvärlden var dessa profetier en viktig källa till tröst under den långa mörka vintern. Profetier inom parentes eller citationstecken, rättare sagt, för det handlar om spårdomar och inte profetia, alltså spårdomar, ockulta spårdomar. För att fira händelsen byggde druiderna enorma heliga brasor där människor samlades för att bränna grödor och djur som offer till de keltiska gudarna. Under firandet har kelterna kostymer vanligtvis bestående av djurhuvuden och skinn och försökte berätta om varandras förmögenheter. Enligt gamla dokument i sin mest primitiva skepnad skulle Samhain, nuvarande då Halloween, ha presenterat många offer till de keltiska dödsgudarna. Både djur och människor kastades in i enorma eldgropar som offer. Folk hävdade att de forntida druiderna åt sina förstfödda barn på Samhain eller samlade blodet från sina offermänniskor i kittel och drack det. Ja, det här kan man ju känna igen från satanismen i vår tid lika väl. Men ingen gör väl sådana saker längre, eller hur? Nåväl, pastor John Ramirez säger att när han var en praktiserande satanist deltog han faktiskt i offret av djur på Halloween. Ramirez, nu pastor, alltså kristen och frälst, vet allt om Halloweens mörka verklighet. Han offrade en gång djur som en del av sataniska ritualer och hans vänner kände honom till och med som Lucifers son. Nu som på nyttfödd troende varnar han starkt kristna för att fira Halloween och delta i skördefester. Den enda skörden vi bör fira är skörden av själar, tillägger han. Slut citat. Ja, till skillnad från detta firande av Satan, mörker, skräck och död är De bibliska högtiderna, firande av Guds godhet och kärlek, nåd och barmhärtighet, rättfärdighet och dom, ljus, befrielse och frälsning från mörkret. Det är verkligen orsak att fira. Allt för många människor har bitter erfarenhet av det ockulta, av det man kallar spökjakt till exempel, andeguider eller då demoner inom New Age och nyandlighet, österländska religioner och andra mysteriereligioner som öppnar för sånt här. Satanism är ju naturligtvis bland det, men det är ju själva syftet med satanism. Jesus sa med syfte på Satan eller djävulen i Johannes 10 och vers 10: tjuven kommer bara för att stjäla, slakta och döda. Jag har kommit för att det ska ha liv, ja, liv i överflöd. Jag är den gode herden. Den gode herden ger sitt liv för fåren. Och det är vad Jesus gjorde för oss. Jesus vill ge liv. Och det är att bli på nytt född, det är Guds liv. Guds liv i oss, Jesu liv. Genom den heliga ande, när vi blir födda på nytt, tar emot Jesus som vår Messias, frälsare och Herre. Och han ger liv. Liv i överflöd. Det finns kyrkor som apar efter världens mörker och man önskar att det inte förekom, men så är det ju. Vi såg en evangelist som gav ett väldigt bra råd på en video från, jag minns inte om det var USA eller England, men han var engelsktalande i alla fall. Och han använder sedan många år Halloween till evangelisation. Och han uppmanar kyrkor att göra detsamma. Och både kyrkor och privatpersoner som har en egen trädgård till exempel. Duka upp ett stort bord med gåvor av olika slag, med godis och vad du vill. Och traktater med evangeliet och berätta om Jesus för dem som kommer. Och berätta varför du inte firar mörker och död i Halloween. Och skräck och allt vad som ingår. Och jag vet att det finns privatpersoner som gör detta, och detta är ett väldigt bra råd till kyrkor. Vi läser från första Johannes brev kapitel 1 vers 1. Där Johannes skriver: det som var från begynnelsen, det vi har hört, det vi med egna ögon har sett. Alltså Johannes var ju en av Jesu lärjungar och verkligen ett av ögonvittnena till allt som hände. Det vi skådade och med våra händer rörde vid. Om livets ord är det vi vittnar. Jesus är vägen, sanningen och livet, och han är ju också ordet, Guds ord, uppenbarad. Ja, livet uppenbarades, vi har sett det och vittnar om det och förkunnar för er det eviga livet som var hos Fadern och uppenbarades för oss. Det vi har sett och hört förkunnar vi för er, för att också ni ska ha gemenskap med oss. Och vår gemenskap är med Fadern och hans son Jesus Kristus. Och detta skriver vi för att vår glädje ska vara fullkomlig. Detta är det budskap som vi har hört från honom och som vi förkunnar för er, att Gud är ljus och att inget mörker finns i honom. Det är det som vi ska hålla oss till och som vi vill sprida. Vi vill inte sprida mörker, vi vill sprida ljus och Guds kärlek till människor. Det var lite om denna mörkrets högtid Halloween, som vi naturligtvis inte tar del av, aldrig skulle fira överhuvudtaget. Och det uppmanar vi också andra att inte göra. Prophecy News Update skriver: Israel på krigsdag 391, som då var igår. Hizbollah utser ny ledare för att efterträda Nasrallah. Israel varnar för att hans mandattid kan bli den kortaste i historien. En annan rubrik: ska Iran slå till innan valet i USA? Islamiska republiken planerar enligt uppgift definitivt och smärtsamt svar. Ja, det här tog jag upp tidigare, att den enda nationen i Mellanöstern, det enda landet i Mellanöstern som har all rätt att försvara sig, för det enda landet som är egentligen attackerat är Israel. Israel har 100% rätt att försvara sig. Och Israel för ett försvarskrig på 7 fronter. Tror det eller ej. Jag tror inte något annat land i världen hade klarat det. Men det är därför att Gud vakar enligt sitt ord, enligt bibelordet, så vakar Gud över Israel. Och kan Gud hjälpa ett land i krig? Ja, naturligtvis kan han det. Naturligtvis kan han det. Så är ju den här världen. Men Gud har gett löften till Israel. Så naturligtvis kan Gud även hjälpa Israel i krig. Precis som han kan hjälpa varje människa som söker Guds hjälp. Israel och Libanon kan närma sig potentiella överenskommelser för att avsluta Hezbollah-kriget. En analys där. Ett läckt utkast till ett avtal med Libanon dyker upp när förhandlingarna i Gaza fortskrider, men experter varnar för upprepade tidigare misslyckanden. Ja, nu är det tyvärr så att Hezbollah, denna terrororganisation, har infiltrerat hela Libanon och har väldigt mycket makt upp i regeringen där, så att det är väldigt svårt att göra något som helst överenskommelse med Libanon, för det går ju inte att lita på dessa terrorister överhuvudtaget. Och vi vet hur de tar makten. Det är ju ofta genom hot och dödshot och mord och så vidare, genom våld, som de islamister de är och den profet som de följer i fotspåren. Riyadh är värd för det första globala alliansmötet på hög nivå om tvåstatslösning, läser vi. Saudiarabien var på onsdagen värd för det första mötet i en ny global allians som syftar till att upprätta en palestinsk stat. Det här är ju det sista man ens skulle nämna i detta läget. Det är så fruktansvärt sjukt, men denna världen är ond och sjuk. Israel video rubrik: medan det amerikanska teamet har varit i Israel och pressat Israel att acceptera en vapenvila med Hezbollah, dödades 7 människor i norra Israel idag. Och detta hände alltså igår. Idag är vi på dag 392 i kriget som attacken mot Israel, och som Israel krigar och kämpar för sin existens och få bort dessa som enbart är besatta av att utplåna Israel. 101 är fortfarande gisslan. All Israel News, några rubriker och några citat därifrån. 7 civila dödade av Hezbollah-raketer 31 oktober, alltså igår fredag. 2 civila israeler, en man och en kvinna, dödades när en raket exploderade nära dem i kibbutz Afek under den tidigare raketattacken mot det större Haifa-området, rapporterade Magen David Adom, räddningstjänsten. Enligt Magen David Adom landade raketen i ett jordbruksområde nära väg 79 in till kibbutzen. Ytterligare en man på cirka 70 år vårdades för lindriga skador på platsen. Totalt dödades 7 civila av Hezbollahs raketer idag. Hamas tjänstemän avvisar senaste gisslanavtalet. En annan rubrik: 5 israeler skadades allvarligt av Hezbollah-raket i Metula. En israel fick allvarliga skador och 4 andra skadades allvarligt när en Hezbollah-raket exploderade i en fruktträdgård nära staden Metula i övre Galileen, enligt israeliska medier. Ja, detta pågår alltså, raketbeskjutning mot Israel pågår alltså varenda dag i princip. Och det kanske stormedia har glömt bort att rapportera, eller? Ja, de blundar för det de vill blunda för, denna korrupta media. IDFs arabiska talesman uppmanar till evakuering av fler byar i södra Libanon, kan vi läsa här. Hizbollahs terroristaktiviteter tvingar IDF att agera kraftfullt mot den i dessa områden och vi har inte för avsikt att skada er, sa Adre. För din säkerhet måste du evakuera dina hem. Det ska väl egentligen översättas: för er säkerhet måste ni evakuera era hem omedelbart och flytta norr om Avalifloden. För er säkerhet måste ni evakuera utan dröjsmål. Det här var alltså Israels arabiske talesman som då uppmanar libaneser att evakuera. Alla som är i närheten av Hizbollahs element, anläggningar eller vapen sätter sitt liv i fara, varnade Adre. Ni är förbjudna att åka söderut. Varje förflyttning söderut kan vara farligt för era liv. Vi kommer att informera er om lämplig tidpunkt för att återvända till era hem så snart förhållandena är lämpliga för detta. Slutcitat där. Och detta gör ju Israel hela tiden IDF för att inte civila ska skadas eller dödas. Uppmanar till evakuering. Och det är naturligtvis en nackdel för IDF för att kunna överraska i krig, men det är viktigare för IDF att civila inte skadas eller dödas. Israel Today skriver: Iron Beam Laser Interceptor får massivt uppsving mot slutfasen. Iron Beam, det är ju alltså detta laseravlyssningssystem som är ännu häftigare än Iron Dome. Systemet är redo att förbättra Israels flerskiktiga försvarsarkitektur tillsammans med Iron Dome. I ett betydande framsteg mot att fullborda sitt kraftfulla laseravlyssningssystem tillkännagav det israeliska försvarsministeriet på måndagsmorgonen undertecknandet av en affär på $550 miljoner för att utöka sin laserförsvarskapacitet genom Iron Beam-programmet. I samarbete med huvudutvecklaren Rafael Advanced Defense Systems och Elbit Systems. Elbit System ligger ju i Mölndal här i Göteborg som vi vet. Ja, det var ju en pinsam händelse där för ett tag sedan när en ung tonårskille lyckades gå in med vapen och polisen stod utanför och vakta, men det får vi väl försöka att glömma. Här kommer nu en video från TBN och Yair Pinto. Den heter Ett totalt avväpnande av Hizbollah är fokus i IDFs nya strategi. Så får vi det senaste därifrån som Yair Pinto har spelat in på TBN. Och med detta så önskar jag er en fin helg utan Halloween. För många är det en helg, alla helgons helg, som man tänker på dem som har gått före, de som har avlidit, nära och kära som man sörjer och saknar. Och låt oss också då komma ihåg hur viktigt det är att vi har tron på Jesus Kristus, Yeshua HaMashiach, så att vi får ett evigt liv och vet att en dag ska vi uppstå till evigt liv. För det är det som är de goda nyheterna i evangeliet. Och det är det som vi har all anledning att vara tacksamma över och fira i den bemärkelsen. Men naturligtvis är det en tung helg för många. Men det viktiga är att vi firar det som är ljus och hopp, inte det som är mörker och död. Så jag önskar er inte någon alls Halloween, utan jag önskar er en god helg, fin helg, Guds välsignelse och Shabbat Shalom.
The IDF has begun a new phase of operations with the goal of completely eliminating Hezbollah. following the announcement that 71-year-old Naim Qassem will replace Hassan Nasrallah as the organization's Secretary General. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says the appointment is temporary. The countdown has begun. In the meantime, the IDF continues to operate in southern Lebanon, capturing a senior Hezbollah commander and destroying more underground bunkers and tunnels, eliminating dozens of terrorists and attacking over 150 targets from the air. In the Gaza Strip, the IDF published details of the operation in Jabalia that have left Hamas in shock. The IDF is preventing Hamas from re-establishing itself in the northern Gaza Strip and is continuing to guard the Philadelphia corridor in the south to prevent fresh supplies of weapons and ammunition from being smuggled to the terrorist organization Hamas. In a related story, negotiations meant to bring an end to the ordeal of Israel's hostages in Gaza are also continuing, with the outline discussed in Doha, Qatar, and the parties to the negotiations issuing statements indicating cautious optimism that an agreement is near. All of this is going on while Iran continues to threaten in response to Israel's recent airstrikes under ballistic missile production facilities, and other governments in the region are quietly weighing their positions and deciding which side of the fence to stand on. TBN senior analyst Mati Shoshani will give us an in-depth look at the situation in the Middle East after the Israeli attack. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on the 390th day of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, and of course, they are all operating under the directives of Iran, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. Just before we start, please take a second to find the subscribe button and click on it so that you will never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Today's video is sponsored by 8 Days of Hope, which is doing incredible work in the United States. I'll give you more information about them later on, but first, let's go into the news. We will start by taking a closer look at the northern sector in the war against Hezbollah, which announced on Tuesday that 71-year-old Naim Qassem, who served for most of the last 3 decades as Hassan Nasrallah's deputy, has been appointed as the new Secretary General of the organization by the Shura Council. As one of the only surviving members of the senior ranks of the organization, Qassem has served as the de facto leader of Hezbollah since the assassination of Nasrallah last month. It was also reported in Arab media portals that last week he had been ordered by his Iranian masters to flee Lebanon and move to Tehran. This was done because the Iranians were worried for his personal safety if he stayed in Lebanon, and they believe that he can be more easily guarded in Tehran. The president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, said that the presence of Sheikh Naim Qassem at the head of Hezbollah will strengthen the spirit of the resistance. Other Iranian officials issued similar statements in the public to show support for the new leader of Hezbollah. However, despite this rhetoric, Israel warned that Qassem's tenure as Secretary General of the organization could be short if he does not change his policy. In response to the appointment in the question, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant tweeted on his X account, "The appointment is temporary. The countdown has begun." Meanwhile, there were some developments on the ground in southern Lebanon as the forces of the IDF's 91st Division continue to operate, eliminating terrorists and destroying Hezbollah's military infrastructure and weapons both above and below the ground. They are also finding valuable intelligence materials and even taking prisoners who provide their interrogators with valuable information useful for planning future operations. The IDF announced on Wednesday morning that soldiers from the Golani Brigade captured the commander of Hezbollah's Aita al-Shaib region, Hassan Akil Jawad. Shortly afterwards, he was interrogated by the military intelligence, and he provided significant information that the IDF will use to plan its operations in the central sector of Lebanon going forward. Akil is not the only Hezbollah terrorist who surrendered before the IDF forces, but he's the most senior Hezbollah operative who has done so. Several other Hezbollah fighters have surrendered or been captured in the last few days. The information they are providing to the Shin Bet and the IDF intelligence is being put to good use. It includes the locations of more tunnels, bunkers, and weapons depots. This saves the IDF time and possibly lives as soldiers approach these positions knowing exactly what they will find. Speaking of approaching enemy locations, reports in Saudi news portals indicate that the Israeli Air Force attacked several hotspots in Beirut's Dakhia neighborhood over the last 24 hours. In addition, a surface-to-surface missile launched on Wednesday morning from Lebanon towards Israel disintegrated in the air. This incident illustrates the operational problems that Hezbollah is beginning to have, as even the weapons that they still have are not working the way they were designed to. The IDF estimates that only 20% of Hezbollah's arsenal of rockets remains, and many of them might not be in working order. In addition to this, there are indications that the mechanics and the technicians who are supposed to be maintaining and firing these rockets have fled, as the IDF has found many abandoned launchers and ammunition depots all over southern Lebanon. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said recently, while speaking of Hezbollah's rocket force, that it's also not organized in the way that it was organized, in a way that it could fire volleys of similar things. Gallant noted, Hezbollah's tactical situation is set to suffer more setbacks because in the last 24 hours, the IDF has expanded its ground incursion into a fairly important area in terms of restoring security to the Galilee in the north of Israel. This expansion was part of the original plan, but almost no one expected it to happen so quickly. We're not complaining about that though, because we know that in order to reach a post-war settlement that Israel can live with, we need to do as much damage to Hezbollah as possible and as quickly as possible, and push them back far away from Israel's northern border as possible. We hope that Lebanon's internationally recognized government can step up and exert operational control over southern Lebanon. And we also look forward to a day when Lebanon will sign a peace treaty with Israel, just as Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco already have. Guys, please help us by continuing to spread the truth. TBN Israel brings you the news about what is happening in this country, in Israel, and we need your help to get the truth out. And most importantly, we need your help in prayer, as this is a spiritual war. Now, before I hand over the report to TBN's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, to give us an in-depth look at the aftermath of the Israeli attack in Iran, I want to take a minute and talk about something else that affects the entire world. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery. It's estimated that every given day, about 50 million people, mainly women and minors, are being assaulted, abused, kidnapped, and sold. This must be stopped. Our good friends at 8 Days of Hope exist to help survivors of trafficking by creating places of refuge. In the past 5 years, across 8 different states in the United States, 8 Days of Hope built centers and housing, and even an entire campus dedicating to helping girls rescued from trafficking. Now, these victims really need your help. So if you want to support this organization, 8 Days of Hope, you should go to this website here. The address should appear on the screen now, and you can find it again after watching this video. Now I want to turn it over to TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will give us a closer look at the aftermath of the Israeli attack on Iran. As IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi said yesterday, if Iran launches missiles at Israel, we will know how to reach Iran once again with capabilities we have not yet used.
Thank you, Yair. Today we're going to delve deep into the recent developments between Israel and Iran. An intricate story of strategy, precision, and geopolitical implications. This whole story starts more than 1,500 kilometers from Israel in the early hours of Saturday morning, exactly 25 days after Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel. At 2 a.m., reports started emerging of explosions across Iran. These were the first indications that Israel's response to Iran's attack had finally begun. This all started on Friday evening. The meticulously planned operation moved into its execution phase. Pilots and air crews were briefed, aircraft were fueled and armed, and preparations were finalized. Just a few hours later, 100 planes took to the skies. This operation lasted approximately 3 hours and consisted of 3 distinct waves. The first wave began at 2 a.m. It targeted the air defense systems in Iran itself, as well as in Syria and Iraq. Reports indicate that Israeli aircraft destroyed multiple radar stations and missile batteries, effectively blinding Iran's early warning capabilities. This initial strike paved the way for the subsequent waves by ensuring the safety and freedom of flight for Israeli aircraft. It also paved the way for future strikes if they should become necessary. The second wave started an hour later, around 3:30 a.m., and focused on 20 high-value military targets deep within Iran. These included missile production facilities and specifically factories producing surface-to-surface missiles, the type of which were used in the previous attack on Israel. But wait, there's more. On top of the missile manufacturing facilities, highly specialized and very expensive equipment essential for manufacturing solid fuel for the long-range ballistic missiles were also targeted. And finally, plants that produce components for unmanned aerial vehicles were also hit. An Israeli source privy to the details described the intelligence that enabled these strikes as science fiction beyond imagination, end quote, emphasizing the precision accurate to the 16 digits, referencing the exact GPS coordinates, and the irreplaceable nature of these facilities. This all continues with a third wave that concluded by 5 a.m., which targeted any remaining military assets and ensured that all objectives were thoroughly achieved. This wave also served to assess and confirm the success of the previous 2 strikes. So let's go through the key details and numbers. Over 100 Israeli aircraft, including fighter jets, drones, intelligence gathering planes, and aerial refueling tankers, were part of this operation. Approximately 20 critical military sites were hit across multiple provinces of Iran, including Tehran, Khuzestan, and Ilam. Israeli aircraft operated over 1,600 kilometers or 1,000 miles from home, showcasing impressive range and logistical capabilities. And another impressive aspect of this operation was the initial phase, which saw the destruction of at least 3 Russian-made S-300 air defense batteries, significantly degrading Iran's defensive capabilities. Let's break down what this strike means for Iran. The destruction of these facilities has severely hampered Iran's ability to produce and deploy long-range ballistic missiles. Estimates suggest that it could take Iran 1 to 2 years to replace the destroyed equipment, particularly the specialized fuel mixers that are difficult to produce. Satellite images analyzed by independent sources, which include Sentinel and BBC Verify, confirm that significant damage to the Shalhud missile facility, a secret ballistic missile testing site officially described by Iran as a space center. Also heavily damaged was the Parchin military complex, previously associated with the nuclear weapons program. A storage tank at the Abadan oil refinery also suffered damage, and what might have been a warning to the regime that its oil infrastructure is not off limits, or that hit might have been an accident. It's just not clear yet at this time. This brings us to a very large footnote regarding these strikes, and that is the alliance between Iran and Russia, which suffered serious collateral damage from this Israeli operation. The S-300 system is one of Moscow's most highly regarded pieces of military hardware, highly sought after by armies all over the world. Exports of military equipment is a major source of revenue for the Russian government, and the S-300 is considered one of the crown jewels of its defense manufacturing sector. But the ease with which these Israeli aircrews, using aircraft, missiles, and electronic warfare technology jointly developed by Israel and the United States, destroyed all these S-300 systems must be very embarrassing for the Kremlin. This comes on top of the many battles in the Ukraine war, where some of Russia's newest and best technology, and some of its most advanced systems, the ships, the tanks, the jets, the helicopters, and artillery systems, have been outmatched by Western weapons utilized by the Ukrainian forces. All of this is making countries that have historically purchased large quantities of Russian military hardware think twice. To all of this can be added Moscow's alarm because of the destruction of the Iranian plants that manufacture ballistic missiles and drones, which Russia needs for its continued war against Ukraine. All this leads to another question about what was hit and where. By destroying radar installations and missile batteries in the first wave, Israel ensured that subsequent strikes would face minimal resistance. The second and third waves utilized real-time intelligence and advanced weaponry to strike the missile and drone facilities with pinpoint accuracy. The destruction of the fuel mixers is particularly impactful, as these are vital for producing solid rocket fuel and are not easily replaceable. By targeting UAV development sites, Israel aims to curb Iran's ability to produce drones that have been used to threaten regional stability. Now let's take a look at the reaction from Iran to these series of strikes. The Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei responded with a mix of defiance and threats, which is sort of the usual for him. Also interestingly, he opened a social media account in Hebrew attempting to communicate directly with the Israeli public, though it was quickly suspended after 2 posts by the platform. In a separate speech, Ali Khamenei declared the miscalculations of the Zionist regime must be addressed. They must understand the strength, capability, initiative, and determination of the Iranian nation and its youth. Israel made a mistake in its calculations and must realize the will of the Iranian people. Despite these strong words, there is evidence of grave internal concern within Iran. 3 Iranian officials told the New York Times that the destruction of air defense systems has caused deep concern because vital energy and economic centers are now exposed to future attacks. They fear that if Iran retaliates, Israel may use it as a pretext for a larger strike in Iran. This sets up a grave problem for the regime, which rules the Islamic Republic. Any aggressive response could invite a more significant Israeli operation, especially now that Iran's air defenses are compromised. However, failing to respond might be seen as a weakness, both domestically and by regional proxies and allies, not to mention the Russians, of course, and the Chinese, most importantly. In addition to all of that, there are reports that Ayatollah Khomeini's health is deteriorating, and his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, is poised to succeed him. This potential transition could lead to internal power struggles, further complicating decision-making. There's also the reaction of international players to be considered, chiefly the United States. Prior to the Israeli operation, an Iraqi mediator reportedly delivered a message from the US to Iran outlining red lines and emphasizing efforts to limit the Israeli response to prevent regional escalation. NATO officials and other international actors are analyzing the implications of the operation, particularly the vulnerability of Russian-made defense systems. Once again, this is surely providing an irritant between Iran and its Russian ally. Speaking of Iran's allies, Hezbollah and Hamas have both been severely degraded in their ability to threaten Israel. This leaves Iran alone to face the IDF, which has vastly more offensive military power than the Iranians currently do. On the other hand, a badly wounded Hezbollah is also potentially more dangerous, as its surviving leadership might feel emboldened to act on their own without Iranian approval. Or they might feel more exposed without Iranian backing, and this might lead them to back off, or at least in the short term. Now finally, there is the possibility that Israel's demonstrated capability to strike deep within Iran alters the strategic calculations for both nations and may deter future aggression. In any event, Israel's operation was a calculated and precise response to ongoing threats. By significantly degrading Iran's missile production capabilities and air defenses, Israel, finally, has sent a clear message of deterrence. At the same time, Iran must now navigate a complex set of challenges, balancing the desire to respond with the risks of further losses. We're all at a pivotal moment in the Middle Eastern geopolitics. The coming days, and possibly weeks, will reveal whether this escalation leads to further conflict or, hopefully, opens a window for diplomatic resolutions. For more in-depth analysis and the latest updates, I invite you to visit our website at tbnisrael.com/news. Stay informed and connected with the truth about Israel and the Middle East. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm Mati Shoshani, and will continue to monitor these developments closely. Now back to you, Yair.
Thank you, Mati. In the last 24 hours, Division 162 and the Shin Bet completed an operation around the Hamas stronghold at the Kamel Adwan hospital in Jabalia, in the Gaza Strip. The operation was launched because of intelligence reports indicating the presence of large numbers of Hamas fighters in the hospital compound, and before the IDF forces entered, civilians were allowed to leave. Of course, some of the terrorists tried to escape by putting on civilian clothes and living alongside the real civilians. But checkpoints were set up, and these terrorists were quickly discovered and arrested. In total, 600 terrorists who had tried to use the hospital as a base of operation were captured in the 2 weeks operation. Some of them inside the hospital, but many more as they tried to escape. The IDF forces were also aware that some civilians had stayed in the hospital because they were forced to do so by Hamas, who wanted to use them as their own human shields. Some of these civilians tried to escape, and the Hamas gunmen shot them in the legs to prevent them from running away. The commander of Division 162, Lieutenant Colonel Itzi Cohen, devised a plan to trick the remaining Hamas fighters inside the hospital into concentrating in one specific area of the hospital, and then that area was quickly surrounded by IDF troops. The Hamas fighters trapped inside the perimeter were told that there was no hope for them to continue fighting, and it was time for them to surrender. The plan worked, and the operation ended successfully. Meanwhile, the Air Force has been hard at work attacking the remaining Hamas Palestinian Islamic Jihad positions in the central Gaza city of Khan Yunis. Hamas has managed to regroup in this city, which the IDF evacuated several months ago. But the Air Force is keeping up the pressure and preventing a buildup of Hamas military power in that location. The overall strategy in the Gaza Strip is to evacuate the remaining civilian populations from the northern sector to humanitarian safe zones further south. This will allow the IDF to concentrate on destroying the remaining Hamas units that have concentrated in the north. It will also allow the IDF to deliver humanitarian aid to those who need it and not have to worry about the aid being stolen by Hamas so they can use it for their own purposes while the civilian population of Gaza, who they never cared about, will starve. Hamas has largely been defeated in the Gaza Strip, and they have been reduced to a very small guerrilla terrorist organization that is holding its last bargaining chip in its hands, and that is the Israeli hostages. In order to secure the release of these hostages, Israel is forced to negotiate and try to push for a ceasefire that will include post-war conditions that the State of Israel can live with. The two main conditions that Israel has for a ceasefire agreement is that it will not be open-ended, but rather Israel reserves the right to continue fighting Hamas if the need arises. The other main condition is that the IDF will maintain positions on the Philadelphia corridor to prevent the smuggling of weapons from Egypt into Gaza, and it will also maintain positions on the Netzer corridor to prevent Hamas movement of weapons and fighters between the northern and the southern parts of Gaza. These are the basic conditions that Israel demands. They are part of the outline discussed at the summit in Qatar by Dedi Barnea, the head of the Mossad, CIA Director William Burns, and mediators from Qatar and Egypt, who are expected to meet with representatives from Hamas this week and present them the various proposals that are on the agenda. This will lead to a decision on whether Hamas is ready to return to the negotiating table on what is defined as the small deal. Several proposals are on the agenda. First, the Egyptian outline, the main point of which is the release of 4 hostages in exchange for a 14-day ceasefire and the release of prisoners. The second proposal that is on the table talks about the release of 11 to 14 abductees, including all the women and adults that are still in captivity, in exchange for a 30-day ceasefire, but also in which Israel will be required to release prisoners, the number of which will be discussed during the negotiations. Barnea's outline does not include territorial concessions or Israeli withdrawal. Sources who comment on the issue are very skeptical that the deal will be closed before the United States elections, and it is estimated that after them, heavy pressure will be applied to Netanyahu from both Trump and Harris to strive to an end to the war in the north and the south, and to bring about a ceasefire and a plan for the release of the Israeli hostages. I also need to tell you some sad news about 4 more casualties in this war, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed in action and civilians killed in terrorist attacks and rocket strikes in the month of October to 80. This is the highest monthly total in 2024. Guys, Israel is fighting a war for its survival, but also this is a spiritual war between good and evil. The enemy wants to destroy Israel because it is a symbol of God's faithfulness to all of us. So stay encouraged as we serve a faithful God and unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem.